Speaker is Mr. Prashant Kapoor, Chief Industry Specialist, Green Buildings and Green Cities International Finance Corporation. Mr. Kapoor will share on the opportunities in green building transformation. Over to you.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Just a quick word. IFC is the largest emerging markets-focused private sector investor. I work as an industry specialist on green buildings and green cities. So what I shall be sharing with you is a perspective focused on buildings, because that's the world we are in from my side. But starting off, explaining how we have managed to scale things up with new construction, new green buildings work, using a tool, a political will, and some finance, some money to make it happen. And then how those things could tell us about how we can scale up existing buildings. It's a much tougher nut to crack, as we all know, energy efficiency on existing stock, but it's super critical. So I shall cover those two aspects, and hopefully it'll feed into the discussion later on. In terms of buildings, I don't have to tell you this, but it's the largest, carbon producer. If you include building materials, it's even bigger, right, in terms of emissions. But one thing we shouldn't forget is that, for low-income families particularly, it can mean a lot in terms of reducing cost. Could also have an impact in terms of the ability to have disposable income. So it has a dual benefit, unlike, say, resilience and other things. There's a cost savings could really have tangible benefits. It also, from an investor point of view, has a huge investment opportunity. I think $24 trillion is such a big number in terms of a possibility of what we can do in terms of investment. So it's huge as an opportunity. But when you scale this compared to some of the large countries, existing buildings, as you can see here, is almost bigger than some of the countries put together. But that's not the end of the problem. What we realized about a decade ago, that before we tackle existing buildings, there's a bigger ghost of a problem coming up, which is new construction, which is slightly easier to tackle, but that's hidden. People don't realize the city is growing until it's too late. So the idea was to focus on this new, stock that is almost going to double in the next 10 years, and really get some solutions for this. But when we looked around, we only work in emerging markets. We saw very small amounts of new construction going green. And we explored this a little bit further, and we found that building regulations are tough to implement in a lot of these places, and we can go into that later. But also, some of the rating systems are mostly in these markets are mostly focused on, commercial, very high-end projects, sort of American offices in some of these countries, right? So it's really not scaling as much. So we had to think about a way. Think about it, right? If you need to have a standard that you can apply widely, because just having a few green projects is not going to change anything, right? You need to really, in order to transform things, you really have to bring scale. And in order to bring scale, you need to have something that is smart, that is easy to use, and it's affordable. It had to be cheap, but most importantly, and I'll show you why, it also had to talk in terms of numbers. Now, you may not be able to see this very clearly, but I think go to our website. Oh, I wish I'd put it up here, edgebuildings.com. And it's free to use. The software really made it really easy for many people, thousands of users, to know any building in any city. It had local data. It could quickly help people figure out how much energy will my project use, how much water will it use, how much building materials will it use. And then you're able to kind of balance. You can choose things to make the project better. This fundamentally changed the reality of what our business looked like. And it's difficult for me to say it, but unless I show you some of the numbers, it's difficult to, hopefully that changes it. Yeah, you can see we do almost from nothing a few years ago to $1 billion of investments a year, thanks to this tool, and the certification process and a standard that we created on this. But I wanted to give you one story in terms of that has really meant a lot to me personally, because trying to do lots of green projects around is one thing, but trying to transform one's country is another. So let me take this example. A lot of text here, forgive me. But on Colombia, we started with working with the Real Estate Association. We teamed up with them to have sort of this marketed around the country. We also worked with the government on some building codes, try to come up with high-level building codes for the larger building typologies. And then we funded, through a green bond structure, a bank, Bank Colombia, about $115 million. And they started to offer green mortgages and green construction finance, with their own pockets. There's no incentive that we gave other than just commercial money. And that really transformed it. We worked with 400 developers in many 16, 17 cities, trying to get them to connect the dots between the mortgage provider and the builders, and that really started to make a difference. They had pipeline overnight, and I'll show you, within 4 years, 20% of all construction in Colombia is using edge. Just think about that. That's the sort of scale of urgency we need in the building industry. I won't stay too long. The rest of the story continues. We have 5 other banks now, and some concessional funds that is critical to scale this up. We have done this sort of thing in many markets, as you can see here in South Africa, some more successful and some less successful. But what I wanted to share with you is this idea that we can do things fast with the right sort of ability. And the question now is, how do we shift this? The last 5 minutes, I want to talk about existing buildings. How do you transfer this energy into existing projects? As I said, it's a tougher nut to crack. The reason it's difficult is, look at the churn rate. So if you take a 10-year cycle, only 1% of the stock really gets converted in a given year. So even if you wanted to green the existing block, you need to be able to inspire people to actually upgrade, never mind green upgrade, right? So how do you get more than 10% to about 40% of the stock to change, to have a dent at this? The good thing is it's a big investment opportunity. You can see that's here. It also could do a lot of, with this whole green rebooting that's coming because of COVID, this is a chance for us to also look at creating jobs. And actually, refurbishment jobs, unlike any other jobs, construction jobs anyway are pretty manually intensive, but refurb is particularly intensive in terms of, having people work on sites, and has more jobs, I think 25 jobs per $1 million spent. So it's huge as an opportunity. So the question is, are there enough projects to green, right? Are there enough brown buildings? And this is where I feel like this is important, because look around you. Even this building can actually be improved, believe me, even though it's not that old. Okay, too much glass, too much air conditioning, too much inefficient stuff that's been applied everywhere else. So, and IEA has the statistics of 80% of investment grade opportunity is not used. How do we get more of this? I mean, just to give you about, in transport, like your cars or industrial buildings, 40%. So almost half more than any other industry, inefficiency. So can it be done? I won't go into this. There's enough technology. So technology is not the problem. The problem, to some extent, I wouldn't say it is not at all a problem. Compared to new buildings, where the payback is 2 to 5 years, here it can be up to 20 years. So we need something long-term that can help this work. And maybe some countries like Singapore, where the cost of energy is higher, you can get it lower in terms of paybacks. But places like Indonesia, where it's still $10, 10 cents a kilowatt hour, you're not going to get, unless the pricing is done right, you're not going to get, quick payback. And then, you also need government support. So some really good example, including the Singapore example, of having policies to push existing buildings to even realize what the energy is, having the audits done. Okay, some really great example from Cap and Trade in Tokyo. I hope that continues and spreads across the world. It's a great example from Japan. It had a little bit of a hurdle after the tsunami, but I think it's gotten back on. And then New York. I mean, who would have thought New York will be able to push a mandate and not look at a market mechanism every time, right? So they're putting a penalty on projects that don't hit a target. So they've gone for a cap and pay model rather than a cap and trade model, if you like. But these are great examples. I think we need more of this at a city level, country level. But what is also good is that corporates, I mean, it has shifted the market. I mean, you just have to read the news. Big players are talking about it. Okay, you can be cynical and say net zero carbon, blah, 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 right? We know this one. But if we are able to use this, because most of these corporates are dealing with buildings, and if we can show them how it's done as technical people, as financing people, then we are able to do something with it. Some big names there, and some really interesting detail, which I won't have a chance to go through in terms of the urgency as well. Now, in terms of money, There is a lot that is already mobilized in the green space. As you can see, green bonds particularly, we did one of the early ones. We were one of the first few investors in 2010. And then since then, it's really skyrocketed. The latest new kid in the block is sustainable building financing. It's perfectly suited for existing buildings because it looks at operational aspects. Whereas green bonds, I'll show you, the next slide has it. Green bonds and green loans are more for static assets, like, assets that you're acquiring and that have a green label. But for net zero carbon and stuff like that, sustainable linked bonds is perfect. So it's kind of momentum in terms of financing, at least debt financing is in the right direction. Now, how do we do this scaling up? So one idea is that, you don't want it to be totally unfair to a project that is green. Or reasonably efficient to scale down to net zero, as you know, right, to 0% in 2050, 50% by 2030. And we feel that we can use the same edge tool benchmark, the baseline, to have as a reference to give enough of a hurdle to make the reduction happen. Okay, so you can actually have this, and what we do with our sustainable linked products is that we have 25 basis points, 25% lower interest rate if they stay true to this. So there could be other ways that we can incentivize this model and make it go forward. Just want to run through, we also need new financial models. I think we will be discussing through vendors and others that we need new products. I mean, we have been doing shared saving model that has had some success, the guaranteed saving. Sorry, I'm talking to people that may also know what I'm talking about, so forgive me. But I think we need new ways of doing it. And I think this as a service model that is coming across, good for, it's been scaling up in some of the other industries. If you can bring it here, it could be quite big. And if we can really scale this at a city level with property linked financing, I want to see more of this, where the biggest issue is collection of money and the credit risk of the developer and the developer or the building owner not wanting it on their balance sheet, right? If we can have products like this, where the person is able to borrow and repay through slight increase in property tax, which is anyway has to be given, one is able to kind of scale this up. And the US is a great example of PACE financing, they call it, where they've done, as you can see, 3,000 buildings approximately and $3.4 billion of financing in this space. And I think this is something we want to scale in other countries as well. I'll end with this last slide. Look, there's a lot that has to be done. We've got some experience in funding ESCOs in terms of equity, in terms of green loans for asset owners, on lending through banks. We can do that. We can obviously fund district cooling companies and provide technical assistance to make it work. But I think we probably have another 5 years to get this sorted out. And I think existing buildings, if you're looking at 38% of the problem, you have to tackle this head on. And bottom up. I mean, you can't just rely on renewable energy to solve this thing. It'll never happen that way. You have to kind of meet it halfway at least. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Kapoor, for that very interesting and energetic presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, before we go into the panel discussion, just a reminder.